I was making coffee when the phone rang. The name Emma appeared on the screen. My daughter. I smiled, thinking she was calling to check in like every Sunday morning. But the voice on the other end was cold, flat, stripped of every trace of warmth my child once used to lull me to sleep. Mom, I wanted to tell you before you hear it from someone else. I've sold your house. Jack and I decided to buy a truck. We're going to travel across the country, chase freedom. I thought you'd understand. Then she hung up. No goodbye, no explanation, no apology. I stood still, the spoon still in my hand, listening to the bitter drops fall onto the floor. That house, where I raised 2 children for 30 years after the divorce, where every photo, every handprint on the wall carried a memory, was gone in a 2-minute phone call. 2 minutes to erase an entire lifetime of a mother. I sat down, watching my coffee grow cold, and in that moment, I understood. My daughter had betrayed me. But there was one thing Emma didn't know. I am not a woman who can be erased from her own life so easily. My name is Mary Ellis. I'm 68 years old and live alone in a wooden house by the Astoria coast. That house has carried me through more than 30 years of storms. From days of relentless rain when the sea wind bent the porch roof, to thick, misty mornings when opening the door meant hearing seagulls calling through the salty air. At this age, people often talk about peace. But to me, peace is a luxury. I got divorced in my early 30s, raised 2 children with nothing but my hands, my stubbornness, and the belief that if I stayed kind enough, life would eventually stop testing me. That house, the ivory-painted one with the low wooden fence, was where I rebuilt my life after the man who once promised to protect me walked away. I don't blame him. Men who speak well rarely keep their words. I taught literature at the town's high school, spent my days in class and my nights tutoring to make ends meet. I patched clothes, planted flowers, and taught my children that being kind was the only thing a person could truly choose. David, my eldest, is strong and quiet. He went to the city to study technology and built a career in Seattle. He always said he'd come back for me when I got old, but I know everyone deserves their own life. Emma, my youngest, is more like me, gentle, emotional, and too trusting. Ever since she was little, she used to say, "When I grow up, I'll take care of you, Mom. You won't have to do anything. You'll just stay home and read." That sentence, for a long time, was what I leaned on whenever I was tired. Emma studied accounting, graduated with honors, and worked for a small local firm. She used to be careful, thrifty, and always brought me small gifts: a teacup, an old book, a pair of wool gloves. I once thought, if life could just stay that peaceful, it would be enough. Then Jack appeared. Jack was 4 years older than Emma and used to be a car salesman in Portland. I met him for the first time at a dinner Emma hosted at home. Jack had a wide smile, a confident voice, and a handshake a little too firm, as if to prove he was always in control. He spoke to me with the polished charm of a salesman, respectful, slightly flattering, and overly enthusiastic. "Mrs. Ellis, Emma has told me so much about you. I truly admire women who raise their children on their own. Not everyone can do that." I smiled faintly and replied, "If I didn't, then who would?" Emma blushed and laughed softly. For the first time in years, I saw my daughter glowing like that. And for the first time, I was worried. 6 months later, they got married. A small ceremony held in the backyard under the warm yellow lights and the sound of distant waves. I watched my daughter in her white dress, smiling beside a man I never truly understood, and silently prayed, please let her have peace. But peace, as I've learned, rarely lasts long. After the wedding, Emma quit her accounting job. Jack told me he wanted to do something freer, open a shop that would sell and restore vintage cars. It sounded romantic, at least to someone who'd never had to pay the electric bill. I asked, are you sure about this? You already have a stable job. Emma's eyes shone like a 20-year-old's. Mom, Jack's really talented. He used to be the top car salesman in the region. I believe in him. I want to be part of it. Believe. I once believed in her father the same way. And I know belief is the first thing to shatter when it hits reality. But I didn't say anything more. Children don't need advice. They just need the right to make mistakes. The shop opened for a year. They called it Steel and Soul Motors. It sounded like the title of an old movie. At first, things looked good. They posted photos online, business was steady, and Emma spoke to me with the excitement of someone living her dream. I visited the shop once. The smell of paint and oil filled the air, laughter echoing between them. I remember leaving early, feeling like a stranger in their world. Then Emma's calls started coming less often. One day, she said, Mom, we've got a big opportunity. There's this old RV truck Jack thinks we can fix up and use to travel and buy cars across states. We just need a bit of capital. I was thinking of mortgaging the house for a while. Once things pick up, we'll pay it back immediately. I put my teacup down and looked at her. You're thinking of mortgaging this house? Just temporarily, Mom. We only need about 2 months to turn things around. This is my house, Emma. Your father's, yours, and your brother's. Are you sure you know what you're doing? I promise, Mom. Just 2 months. I didn't want to doubt my daughter. I had taught her to be honest, so I believed her. Believed. Once again. 2 months passed, then 3. No updates. Calls went unanswered. The texts were brief. Don't worry, Mom. Everything's fine. Until one gray, cold autumn morning, I was sitting in our old cafe by the harbor, the same place I used to pick Emma up after school. My phone rang. Emma's name appeared on the screen. I smiled, relieved. Sweetheart, it's me. Mom, I wanted to tell you so you wouldn't be shocked. Her voice was distant, firm. Jack and I sold the house. We bought the truck. We're about to hit the road, travel across the country. I thought you'd understand. Sold the house? Emma, what are you talking about? I'll send you your share, Mom. Don't worry. My share? This is my house, Emma. I don't want to argue, Mom. I have to go. I love you. Bye. That bye was light, dry, and it landed in my ear like the sound of a metal door closing. The call lasted less than 2 minutes, but it was enough to cut through 45 years of motherhood. I sat frozen, staring through the fogged cafe window. People around me kept laughing, chatting, life moving as usual, except for me. Empty. Outside, the rain began to fall. I thought of all the seasons that had passed in that house. The day David took his first steps in the living room, the rocking chair I repainted the winter Emma went to college. The nights the three of us ate potato soup with the radio humming softly. And now, all of it was gone, traded for an old truck and the foolish dream of a man who once said, "Freedom is all we need." I stood up, paid for my coffee, and walked home, or rather, to what used to be home. The familiar wooden gate was locked. A sold sign hung crooked under the rain. I stood there for a long time. No tears, no screams, only the feeling of my heart as cold as the sea beyond, silent but unbearably salty. Perhaps this is how the world takes back what it once gave me, through the betrayal of the person I loved most. But there is one thing Emma doesn't know. I once survived the betrayal of a man. I can survive the betrayal of my own child. 3 weeks after that phone call, I was officially forced to leave the house where I had lived for nearly half my life. The police knocked on my door, accompanied by 2 young men in black suits from the bank. They handed me a stack of papers and said the transaction had been completed and that I needed to vacate the property within 10 days. I remember standing in the middle of the living room after they left, looking around at the faded patches on the walls where picture frames once hung, at the small cracks on the wooden floor I had always meant to fix, and thinking, old age doesn't begin with wrinkles. It begins the moment you're kicked out of your own life. I packed quietly. Everything I could take fit into 6 cardboard boxes, a few books, some clothes, photo albums, and a small wooden frame carved with the words, "Emma and David, Summer 1995. I thought about leaving it behind, but in the end, I packed it. Whether I wanted to or not, it was still a part of me. A part that once meant something. The day I left, it rained. Neighbors stood at their gates, watching. I heard them whisper, "Poor Mrs. Ellis. Her daughter sold her mother's house just to go traveling." I heard they bought a big truck, said they wanted to live on the road for freedom. I walked slowly, head held high, but inside, every word felt like a knife. They didn't mean harm. It was pity. But pity, sometimes, is even more humiliating than contempt. I rented a small attic room in an old building in downtown Astoria. The ceiling was low, the walls stained, and the window hinges were broken, letting the wind whistle through the nights. I brought Emma's old bedside lamp, the one with the cream-colored shade and the faint pencil marks she'd drawn on it when she was 10. Every night, I turned it on and watched its weak glow as if staring at the last remaining light of motherhood. David called once a week. His voice was worried, yet helpless. "Mom, I'm sorry I couldn't get there in time. I'm in the middle of a project, but once it's done, I'll come for you. Don't worry about me. You have your own family now. Take care of them first." I just can't stop worrying. "Emma, has she said anything to you?" "No, she hasn't said a word." We talked like 2 strangers trying to recall a shared memory. I knew David was angry at his sister, but he also knew I didn't want to hear any more about it. At this age, I no longer need to take sides. I just need silence so the pain doesn't spread any further. One afternoon, I stopped by the grocery store downstairs. As I walked past the counter, the young cashier looked up. "You're Emma Ellis's mother, right?" I follow them online. They're such a cute couple. I love their travel vlog. Their truck is amazing. I forced a smile. Yes, it's beautiful. When I got back to my room, I opened my old laptop. The homepage showed a photo of Emma and Jack standing in the Nevada desert, sunlight blazing, with a shiny silver truck behind them. The caption read, "Freedom is when we leave the old behind to find ourselves again." Over 200,000 likes. I read the line again and again. Freedom by selling your own mother. I stared at myself in the mirror for a long time. The woman there had tangled gray hair, deep eyes, and the weary face of someone who had lost. I'd spent my life teaching students how to write meaningful sentences, yet I couldn't keep my own story from being erased. That night, I woke at 3 in the morning. Rain tapped steadily against the tin roof. I took out the old photo album from the box. Inside was a picture of Emma, at about 6 years old, running barefoot in the backyard, sand stuck to her feet, laughing uncontrollably. I remembered that day clearly. I was hanging the bed sheets outside while she ran around holding a seashell, saying, "Mom, I'm going to build a house right here by the sea, so you'll never have to teach again." And she did build it. Only it wasn't a house with room for me. I cried for the first time since leaving home, not for the lost property, but for the feeling of being erased from the memory of the child I once carried in my arms. People say the deepest pain isn't betrayal itself. It's when the betrayer truly believes they've done nothing wrong. The next morning, I received a small envelope in the mail. No return address, just familiar handwriting. To Mom. Inside was a check. 6 figures. Enough to buy another small house. A note read, "Your share." I held the check, my hands trembling. Your share. No one gets to divide what was created by their own hands. I folded the check and placed it in a drawer, exchanging it for nothing. What good is money? It can't buy back memory. That day, I walked to the beach. The sky was heavy with clouds, waves crashing hard. I stood there, feeling the cold water wrap around my feet, and wondered where I had gone wrong. Had I loved too much? Trusted too much in the so-called bond of blood? Maybe I taught Emma how to be good, but forgot to teach her that kindness doesn't mean permission to harm those who love you. That evening, when I returned to my apartment, I opened the desk drawer to look for a utility bill and felt something unusual. An old envelope, yellowed with time. I recognized the handwriting instantly. My ex-husband, Thomas Ellis. On the front, it read, "Open only when you truly feel alone." I carefully opened it. Inside was a copy of his will, written more than 10 years ago. In it, Thomas left me 20% of the shares in Ellis and Grant, the law firm he co-founded when he was young. A portion of the shares not yet transferred, something I'd never known about. I thought back to our divorce, when he gave me a small settlement and said, "It's all over now." But in this will, he had written clearly, "Mary is the only person I trust to use what's left in the right way." I sat frozen, staring at that line. All these years, I thought I had nothing left. But it turned out the only thing I'd lost was the illusion of being powerless. I folded the paper and slipped it into my pocket. Inside me stirred something new. Not tears, but a calm, steady determination. I stepped out onto the small balcony, looking down at the street below. Streetlights cast golden reflections over puddles of rainwater. The night wind carried the scent of salt from the sea. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. I've been silent long enough, I whispered to myself. It's time to take back what's mine. And for the first time in months, I turned on every light in the room, as if to awaken the part of me that had been asleep for far too long. I went to see Stephen Blake on a Tuesday morning in the old red brick building in downtown Astoria, the same place where he had once worked with my husband nearly 30 years ago. Stephen was past 70 now, his hair completely white, but his eyes were still sharp, like a blade that had never dulled. He looked up when I entered, a faint smile crossing his face, part surprise, part nostalgia. Good Lord, Mary Ellis, how many years has it been? 25, if you count the silent ones, I replied softly, but deliberately. He invited me to sit down and poured some coffee. The smell of roasted beans mixed with the faint scent of old wood, and for a moment, I felt like I had stepped back into a younger version of myself, a woman who once believed that justice was something you could hold in your hands. I told Stephen everything. No embellishments, no excuses, just the truth. My daughter, the house, the check labeled your share, and the old envelope I found in my drawer. Stephen stayed silent the entire time I spoke, nodding, occasionally, only interrupting with short, pointed questions. When I finished, he sighed, opened an old file drawer, and pulled out a silver fountain pen. Mary, I remember that will clearly. Thomas told me he would send you a copy because he didn't trust his younger partner back then. Seems he was right. Your shares are still legally valid, and far more valuable now since the firm has grown tenfold. But what interests me more is the house. The house is gone, Stephen. I saw the sold sign myself. I was forced out. What's left to talk about? I reviewed the property records last week. That transaction isn't valid. Under Oregon law, any jointly owned property must be transferred with the original signatures of all co-owners. Your signature was forged. I went silent. The first feeling wasn't anger, but a cold, piercing pain, like a needle under the skin. Who did it? I think you already know. Jack. The name surfaced in my mind like a spreading ink stain. Stephen pulled out several sheets of paper. If you want, I can file a case immediately. Forgery is a criminal offense. You could reclaim the house, demand compensation, even have him imprisoned. I looked at him, a reflection of the woman who had lost everything, now standing on the edge between fury and restraint. I don't want anyone in prison, Stephen. I just want them to learn the value of what they destroyed. He studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. I understand. Some lessons only sink in through pain. So, what do you plan to do? I want them to live with their choices. I want them to pay their own price, not one a court imposes. I left Stephen's office just as the rain began to fall. The drops were icy against my skin, but I didn't open an umbrella. Maybe I needed that cold to remind myself I was still alive. 3 days later, I met with Renee Carter, a private investigator Stephen recommended. She was younger than 40, with high-tied brown hair, sharp eyes, and a brisk, no-nonsense voice. She had once worked as a civil investigator before opening her own firm in Portland. "Who are we looking for?" she asked, flipping open her notebook. "My daughter and her husband. They're traveling, probably somewhere around the Southwest. They post a lot on social media. And your goal? I need to know to stay within privacy laws. I just want the truth, not to hurt them. I want to see if they're really as happy as they pretend to be." Renee looked at me for a moment, then nodded slowly. Usually, the people who say they just want the truth are the ones who've endured lies for far too long. That line made me look at her more closely. She was young, but her eyes already carried the quiet folds of someone who had seen loss. Maybe that's why I trusted her instantly. 2 weeks passed. I lived quietly in my attic room, but every morning there was a new email from Renee. Each one held photos, coordinates, and short reports. Flagstaff, Arizona. They stopped at a thrift shop, sold a few small items, laughed a lot. Santa Fe. Jack bought auto parts, paid with a credit card not in his name. Las Vegas. They rented an Airbnb for 3 nights. Jack withdrew $5,000 cash from Emma's secondary card. I read every line, my heart heavy. A part of me still wanted to believe Emma was innocent, that she'd simply been swept away by the dream of the man she loved. But the more I read, the clearer it became. She knew, and she chose to close her eyes anyway. By the second month, Renee sent me a short video recorded from afar. Jack and Emma stood beside their silver truck, sunlight spilling across their faces. Jack had his arm around her shoulders, kissing her forehead. The caption he'd just posted read, "Freedom has no price, except the courage to sell everything to buy it." I turned off the video, letting the tears fall freely. Not from envy, but from sorrow, for how my daughter's innocence had twisted into arrogance. The freedom she spoke of wasn't freedom at all. It was escape, dressed up in the illusion of glory. One night, Renee called me. "Mrs. Ellis, I think you should know this." "What happened?" "Jack's in debt." I checked his credit file. 3 personal loans in the past 6 months, totaling nearly $200,000. 2 of them are already delinquent. He pawned the truck, the same one they're living in. And Emma? I don't think she knows the full truth. She's still posting, still smiling, but less often. And she's isolated. Jack's cut her off from friends and family. I was silent for a long moment before I asked quietly, "Can you keep following them?" "Of course. But I need you to be sure of what you're seeking. Sometimes knowing more only makes the pain deeper." "I'm not afraid of pain, Renee. I'm afraid of not knowing who my daughter really is." By the 3rd month, another photo arrived, this time without smiles. Emma sat on a folding chair beside the truck, her skin tanned, her eyes hollow. Jack stood nearby, on the phone, one hand raised angrily. In the note, Renee wrote, "They fought. The RV park manager said he's behind on payments. She wants to go home." I printed the photo and placed it beside an old picture of 6-year-old Emma, barefoot in the backyard, laughing under the sun. 2 images, two poles of the same life. The child who believed the world was gentle, and the woman learning it was not. That night, I poured myself a small glass of wine, something I hadn't done since Thomas left. I watched the lamplight flicker against the wall and felt a calm settle deep within me. For the first time in years, I understood the strength that comes from silence. A week later, Renee sent her final report. They're back in California. The truck's badly damaged. Jack sold off most of their stuff to pay for repairs. I think they're nearly out of money. He's looking to sell the truck. Emma looks exhausted, maybe ready to leave him. I sat for a long time after reading that. No anger, no sadness, just the stillness of someone who's walked through ruin and found the ground again beneath her feet. I called Stephen. I have enough. Enough to sue, enough to forgive, but not forget. What will you do now? Take back what's mine, but not the way they took from me. I'll reclaim it, through law, through intellect, and through silence so deep it forces them to face themselves. Stephen chuckled softly. Thomas once said, "You were the strongest woman he'd ever known." Now I believe him. I answered, my voice barely above a breath. Not strong, Stephen, just hurt enough to know that revenge doesn't need noise. That night, I opened my computer and saved all the photos, videos, and reports Renee had sent. I created a new folder and named it Redemption. Not to destroy anyone, but to mark the place where I fell and where I would rise again. I sat by the open window, looking out at the dark, endless sea. The waves broke rhythmically, like a heartbeat returning after a long pause. Somewhere out there, my daughter was still wandering the road she called freedom. But freedom cannot be born from betrayal, just as happiness cannot grow from another's pain. I whispered into the darkness, a promise to myself. Now, it's my turn. Since then, every morning, I sit at my desk and reread the will, taking notes on every share, every clause, every law. I practice writing my name over and over. Mary L. Ellis, in bold, steady strokes. No longer the trembling signature of a betrayed mother, but the signature of a woman about to reclaim her life. That winter, the wind came early. I still remember the morning Stephen called, his voice low and steady, like a sad tune played on an old violin string. Mary, the court has approved our motion. All assets are frozen. The house, the land, and every account tied to the transaction. No one can withdraw a cent until the investigation is complete. I sat motionless in my chair, hands wrapped around a steaming cup of tea, watching the vapor blur the air. Each word from him fit together like pieces of heavy, deliberate music, sorrowful, but freeing. I never wanted revenge, Stephen. I just wanted fairness. I know, he replied. And now, fairness has begun. 3 weeks later, the news came like a storm. Jack and Emma had returned to Astoria. According to Stephen's report, they'd planned to sell the remaining land to cover their debts. But when they arrived at the notary's office, they were told the assets had been frozen due to suspected fraud and signature forgery. Renee, the detective, was the first to send me photos. In one, Emma stood outside the courthouse, her face pale, while Jack was arguing angrily with a security guard. I stared at that photo for a long time. Not with satisfaction, but with a strange calm. The first time I'd seen truth cut through the illusion they had built. They asked to meet me. Emma was the one who called. Her voice was hoarse, tired, but trying to stay composed. "Mom, I want to talk." "All right. Where?" "The old cafe by the harbor, 3 o'clock. I chose that place because it was where I used to wait for her after school. The place where I had once taken the phone call that shattered my life. And now, I wanted it to be where I began again, even if it meant beginning among ruins. That afternoon, the rain came hard. Astoria was wrapped in silver gray. Raindrops hit the cafe windows, spreading like ink stains. I arrived half an hour early, chose a table by the window, and ordered a black coffee. Steam rose from the cup, blending into the sound of rain, and I suddenly remembered a brown-haired little girl sitting across from me years ago, telling me about her first day at school. When the door opened, I saw Emma. She stood there drenched, hair tangled, eyes swollen. No trace of the woman in the white dress beside a silver truck, smiling under desert sunlight. She sat down, her hands trembling as they touched the coffee cup the waiter brought. For a long while, there was only the sound of rain. Then Emma whispered, "Mom, why did you do this to me?" I looked up. "You sold me out of my own home, Emma. I only bought myself back." The words came out softly, but I saw her faith shatter in her eyes like glass. "I didn't know Jack forged your signature. I thought everything was legal. I just thought you'd understand. I only wanted to start over. Start over by taking away the roof of the person who gave you breath. I was wrong, Mom. I know that. But you froze everything. I have nothing left." I looked at the daughter I had raised, taught, and loved until I was empty, now sitting before me, head in her hands, crying like a lost child. I wanted to reach out, to hold her the way I used to. But between us lay a distance that love alone couldn't bridge, the distance carved by broken trust. The next day, Stephen called again. "Jack's gone. He emptied their remaining accounts and is now wanted for financial fraud. We think he's trying to cross into Mexico." I listened quietly. No joy, no anger, just a deep, dull ache. Emma came to see me again, not to accuse this time, but to beg. "Mom, they're saying I'm under investigation too. I didn't know about the forgery. I signed what Jack said was a loan agreement. I swear, I didn't know." "If you truly didn't know, you'll be cleared. The law doesn't punish fools, Emma. Only the deceitful." She broke down in tears. Watching her, my heart cracked open again. I no longer saw the proud woman who once said, "Freedom has no price." I saw the little girl in the old photo, sand clinging to her feet, sunlight on her hair, calling Mom with that pure voice. The investigation dragged on for 2 months. I didn't appear in court. Stephen represented me. Everything unfolded as the law demanded. The signature was confirmed as forged, the sale declared invalid, and every related transaction voided. Jack was indicted. Emma was cleared of criminal charges, but All their joint assets were seized to compensate me, totaling $2.5 million. That money, by law, was mine. When Stephen informed me, I only asked one question. Can I buy the house back? You're already the rightful owner, Mary. It's been yours since the judgment was signed. But if you prefer, I can transfer it under a holding company for privacy. Do it! I returned to the house on a cold March morning. Mist blanketed the narrow road to the sea. The old wooden gate was still there, its paint peeling, the for sale sign bent by the wind. I pushed the door open. The hinges groaned. Inside, everything was empty. Only the traces of what once was remained. Marks where pictures had hung, a crack in the wood where I'd once mounted an old clock. I walked through each room, running my fingers along the walls, as if touching the skin of my past. I stood in the kitchen, where laughter once echoed, where mornings smelled of toast and coffee, where conversations wandered nowhere. I whispered to myself, "Welcome home, Mary, but don't mistake this for the end. This is justice." I bought the house under the name Ellis Legacy Holdings, as Stephen advised. It sounded grand, but it was only a legal shell to hide something simple. I had reclaimed what was mine, without shouting, without blood. In the weeks that followed, the local papers picked up the story. They called it the Astoria real estate fraud case, involving a young couple, the husband missing, the wife left with nothing. But no one knew that the woman behind the lawsuit still taught part-time at the local high school, still lived in her small attic apartment, still walked each evening to the harbor. I chose silence. I didn't want Emma to become gossip for strangers. I only wanted her to understand. Justice isn't the hammer that strikes, but the quiet awakening after the noise fades. One evening, Emma appeared at my door. She said nothing, just held out a newspaper. The headline about Jack. Man wanted for $300,000 fraud, forgery, and vehicle ID tampering. I read it, folded the paper, and set it down. Mom, I have no one left. You still have me, I said, without looking at her. After everything I did, you can still say that? Do you think a mother's love is a contract, Emma? It doesn't get voided by your mistakes. Emma cried. I let her, because I knew those tears weren't shallow regret anymore. They were shame, the only kind that can lead to change. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on the porch, staring at the sea. The winter waves were fierce, but beautiful. Moonlight scattered across the water, breaking into thousands of shards like torn memories. I thought about justice, not as judgment, but as the only way lost souls can find their way back. I wasn't happy, nor vengeful, just peaceful. Justice doesn't return lost youth, nor mend the cracks between mother and child, but it puts everything back where it belongs. I had reclaimed my house, my dignity, and my voice, the one I had let others steal for far too long. A month later, Stephen sent his final report. All assets released, the $2.5 million transferred to the company account. I opened the confirmation letter, looked at the long string of numbers, and felt nothing. Money, to me now, was only proof that I had been right. I didn't move back into the house right away. I visited on weekends, sweeping floors, fixing doors, replanting the small flower garden. I didn't hang anything on the walls or bring in furniture. The house stayed empty, but peaceful. A pause after a long, chaotic symphony. One day, Stephen asked, "What will you do with the house?" "Leave it empty. Sometimes silence is the only way to hear your own soul." "You think Emma will come back?" "I don't know. But if she does, I want her to walk into this house not as someone begging for forgiveness, but as someone who finally understands what loss means." That night, I wrote one line in my journal. Justice isn't about winning. Justice is when you can watch someone fall and still feel no joy in it. And as the wind outside whispered across the porch, I thought I heard Thomas's voice, the man I once loved, once despised, but who had left me the chance to reclaim my dignity. "See, Mary? In the end, truth always finds its way home." I smiled softly. I hadn't defeated anyone. I had simply returned to myself. A month after the court's ruling, just as the spring rain began to fall, I heard a knock at the door. The sound was soft but urgent, like the heartbeat of someone trembling. I opened it, and there was Emma. Thin, hollow-eyed, her hair tangled, her hands clutching a worn-out suitcase. Her coat was soaked through, heavy with rain and road dust. "Mom." Her voice was hoarse, frail. "I have no one left." I stood still, neither moving toward her nor turning her away. Between us, silence hung like glass. She looked at me, and for the first time in years, I saw not arrogance, not denial, but true remorse, the kind that cannot be faked. I turned and opened the door wider. "Come in. Don't let people see you standing out there in the rain." Emma stepped inside, bringing with her the damp scent of earth and the uneven breath of someone who had endured too many sleepless nights. She said nothing more, just sat on the chair by the window, her eyes taking in the small apartment I'd lived in for over a year. The same place she once called temporary, shabby, unworthy. I brewed tea and placed a cup in front of her. "Have you eaten?" "No, but it's fine, Mom. I'm not hungry." I looked at her hands. The fingers that once wore gold rings were bare and cracked. The woman who once spoke of freedom now had nowhere left to return to. That night, she stayed. I gave her the small room I used to keep my books in. When I closed the door, I stood quietly in the hallway. From inside came the sound of muffled sobs she tried to hold back. I didn't go in. Some lessons I knew can only be learned in solitude. In the days that followed, Emma spoke little. She woke early, washed dishes, swept floors, then sat quietly reading my old books. I didn't interfere. I wanted her to rediscover the rhythm of a simple life, something she had lost chasing illusions made of wheels and wind. One morning, as I prepared to leave for my tutoring job at the high school, Emma asked, "Mom, can I work? I don't want to just sit here." "What kind of work?" "There's a used bookstore on Riverbend Street hiring. The pay isn't much, but I'd like to try." "If you truly want to, then do it. You have to earn your own meal before you can dream of a feast." She smiled faintly, small, but sincere. 3 weeks later, she got the job at Lighthouse Books. The owner, an old man named Walter, had once taught me how to bind books when I was young. One afternoon, he called and said, "Mary, your daughter's a good one. Quiet, but diligent." Today, she reorganized my entire antique section. Took her nearly 4 hours. No one does that kind of work with such patience anymore. I couldn't speak for a moment. My throat tightened. Because in those words, I saw a glimpse of the girl Emma used to be. The one who could sit for hours mending a torn page simply because she didn't want someone's words to disappear. That evening, when I came home, Emma told me about her day. Her voice was softer, her eyes a little brighter. "Mr. Walter says I have a good way with customers. He said I remind him of you, how you prefer the smell of paper over perfume." I smiled, but said nothing. Time passed, and warmth began to return to the small apartment. We ate dinner together, listened to the radio, sometimes in silence. But it was no longer the silence of distance. Emma learned to walk instead of drive, to cook simple meals instead of ordering takeout, and to read instead of scrolling through screens. Once, I asked, "Do you still keep pictures of Jack?" She shook her head. "I deleted them, not because I hate him, but because I don't recognize the woman in those photos anymore, Mom." One rainy afternoon, I came home from school to find her at my desk, searching for a paper. She called out, "Mom, what's this?" I looked, and my heart froze. In her hands was the folder containing the company shares and account documents, the inheritance Thomas had left me, the one secret I had told no one about, not even David. "I found it in your old drawer." "I wasn't snooping," she said, voice trembling. "Mom, you had all this money all along?" I said nothing. "You could have saved me from everything, and you didn't." Her voice broke, tears spilling. "Why? Why did you let me fall that far?" I sat down and met her eyes. "Because if I'd saved you then, you'd never have learned anything." She stared at me, stunned. I continued, slowly, carefully. "You grew up in a house full of love, and you mistook it for something guaranteed. You had everything, a job, a marriage, money, and you thought happiness was a right. But happiness isn't given, Emma. It's kept." I placed my hand on the table, where the light fell golden and soft. "When you called me from the desert to tell me you'd sold the house, I thought I would die. But then I understood. If I rescued you at that very moment, you'd only do it again. I had to let you hit the ground so you'd know what solid earth feels like." Emma cried, not loud, but deep and raw, like guilt draining through her tears. "Did I hurt you that much, Mom?" "No. You only reminded me that love isn't meant to be used as a bribe. It only means something when it's honored." After that day, Emma changed. She kept the folder, but never mentioned it again. I knew she needed time to absorb the truth, that I could have saved her and chose not to. One morning, I found her in the kitchen, making coffee, her face calm. "Mom," she said, "thank you for not saving me." I smiled. "Thank you for finding yourself." That summer, Emma paid off her remaining small debts. She brought me her first few $100s from her wages. I wanted to refuse, but she said, "I'm not repaying you, Mom. I'm just learning responsibility." That evening, as we ate dinner under the warm yellow light, the moment felt quietly sacred. Not because we'd reconciled, but because we understood each other without needing forgiveness anymore. One day, Emma handed me an envelope. "It's my official contract, Mom. Mr. Walter made me store manager. He said I have an eye for value." I looked at my daughter, no longer the worn-out woman from before, but someone grounded, standing tall on her own feet. "You know," I said, "he's right. You understand value because you once lost it." Emma smiled, and that smile seemed to brighten the whole room. That night, I opened my journal and wrote, "When a child comes home, not because she needs shelter, but because she's learned what home truly means, that's when a mother is redeemed." I closed the notebook and set it by the window, watching the dim sunset fade over the horizon. The sea murmured softly below, the scent of salt drifting through the air. Somewhere in my memory, I heard Thomas's voice, steady and warm. "You did the right thing, Mary. You didn't save her. You saved both your dignities." I smiled and whispered, "Justice gave me back my home, but love, she gave that back to herself." And in that moment, I understood. Redemption doesn't mean erasing the past. It means having the courage to face it and still choose to love. Time passed in a peace I never thought I would know again. Autumn came, and the maple trees along the shore turned gold and red. Every morning, when sunlight slipped through the small window, I would see Emma sitting at the table, absorbed in a book. She took notes in her neat handwriting, pausing now and then to nod, as if something had just clicked into place. I watched her from the kitchen through a soft veil of coffee steam. The sight made me want to cry, not from grief this time, but from something warm and tender. Emma had changed, not through words or promises, but through the quiet persistence of action. 3 months after starting at the bookstore, Emma enrolled in evening classes at the community college, a course in personal financial counseling. She said she wanted to learn to understand her own mistakes and help others avoid them. I remember that first night. She put on her coat, holding a thin notebook, and turned to me with a small smile. "Mom, I'm going to class. I guess I've reached the age where people study because they've already suffered enough." I smiled back. "Go, Emma. Don't be afraid to begin again. It's never too late to stand up the right way." The door closed softly behind her, and I listened to the rain falling on the porch. For the first time in years, I felt light. 2 years passed. Emma graduated with honors. She began working for a nonprofit organization that provided financial counseling to single mothers, women who had lost their homes, been abandoned, or left with impossible debts. I still remember the morning she came home with her first contract, laughing and crying at once. "Mom, I can't believe they trust someone who failed like me." "They don't trust your past, Emma," I said gently. "They trust who you've become." As Emma stepped into her new life, I began my own project. I used the entire $2.5 million settlement to establish a foundation called Ellis Home. The name wasn't to honor a family line, but to reclaim what had been lost. Home, the place where all pain begins and ends. I wanted Ellis Home to be a refuge for women who had lost their homes through marriage, debt, or betrayal. A place to rest, rediscover themselves, and start again, just as Emma and I had. When Emma learned about it, she stood still for a long time. Mom, you want to turn your pain into shelter for others. No, I said softly. I just want to make it useful. If you keep pain locked away, it becomes a scar. But if you share it, it becomes light. Emma looked at me, and in her eyes, I saw a woman who finally understood what healing meant. That spring, we began restoring the old house. It stood quietly by the sea, its windows fogged with dust, its roof streaked with moss. When we stepped inside, the smell of damp wood and old memories ushed out at once. I ran my hand along the wall where our family photos once hung. Emma followed with glistening eyes. I'm sorry, Mom. I sold it without realizing I was selling my own childhood. It's all right now, I said. We'll give it a new soul. All summer, we worked side by side. Emma painted the window frames, I trimmed the fence, and replanted sea daisies along the path. Each afternoon, sunlight slanted through the open windows, dust swirling in the air, mixing with our quiet laughter. We didn't need to talk much. One look was enough to know we were both rebuilding, redeeming. When the work was done, the house seemed alive again. White walls, pale blue shutters, and a small wooden sign on the porch read, Ellis Home, a place to begin again. It wasn't grand or lavish, just a warm house with 3 small rooms, a shared kitchen, and a wooden porch facing the sea. But it became a place where women who had been pushed out of their own homes could find shelter, not just to sleep, but to believe again that they were still worthy of love. Our first guest was Helen, a middle-aged woman abandoned by her husband, with 2 small children. When I opened the door, she said quietly, I don't need money. I just need a place where no one asks why I'm here. I held her hand and smiled. Then, you've come to the right place. Emma helped her plan finances and find a job. I taught her children to read and cook. 3 months later, they left to begin a new life. Before leaving, Helen hugged me and whispered, You didn't just give me a roof. You gave me a reason to keep going. I watched them walk away, and something inside me bloomed. Slowly, Ella's home became small, but known throughout the region. People brought used furniture, books, clothes, even treasures they once cherished. Each item came with a story, and the house became a living archive of rebirth. Emma managed the finances and the counseling programs. She hosted evening talks for women rebuilding their lives. One night, I stood outside the living room, listening to her speak to a small group. I used to think happiness meant having more: a house, money, a man who made me feel important. But I lost everything and realized happiness isn't in what we hold, but in who we become. The room fell silent. I stood there, unseen, hearing my daughter's voice, steady, calm, and alive. I knew then that Emma had become the woman I had always prayed she would be. A year later, Emma was invited to a conference on women and life reconstruction after loss. She stood on stage and told her story, not embellished, not excused, just the truth. Her talk spread across the state. Hundreds wrote letters to Ella's home saying her story gave them hope. One night, when Emma returned from that trip, she hugged me tightly. Mom, I spoke about you. I told them you were the only person brave enough to let me lose everything so that I could have my life back. I smiled, smoothing her hair. No, Emma, you took it back yourself. I just kept the place for you to return to. Time flowed on. The house filled and emptied again like the tide outside. Each woman who came left a story in the notebook on the living room shelf. Emma called it the Book of Return. One afternoon, I read a few lines. I arrived here with nothing and left knowing I still had myself. This place didn't teach me to forget. It taught me how to live with what I lost. I closed the book softly, tears falling without knowing whether from sorrow or joy. Then one evening, Emma sat beside me on the porch, watching the sunset. The sea burned gold, the wind carried salt. She turned to me and said quietly, "Mom, I used to think happiness was about going everywhere. Now I know it's about coming home." I looked at her and smiled. "Not to where you live, Emma," I said gently, "but to where you belong." We sat there for a long time, saying nothing, watching the sea shift from orange to violet, and then to night. The waves moved in rhythm, soft and steady, like two heartbeats finding the same song again. That night, when everyone was asleep, I sat at my desk and opened my journal. The last page was still blank. I took my pen and wrote slowly, word by word, like a prayer whispered into the wind. Justice is not revenge. It is when the heart is returned to where it truly belongs. I closed the book, blew out the lamp, and stepped out onto the porch. Above me, stars shimmered like memories, glowing once more before they faded. I looked toward the sea, the witness to all our loss and rebirth, and whispered, "Thank you, Thomas. Thank you for leaving me, not just wealth, but the chance to love my life again." A soft breeze brushed past, creaking the door open as if in reply. I smiled and closed my eyes. In the breath of the night, I heard the whispers of the sea, of time, of every soul that had suffered and still lived on. Everything finds its way back, if you're patient enough to wait. And so, Ella's home stayed lit each night, not just to guide the lost, but to remind me that sometimes rebirth doesn't begin with change, but with forgiveness. I closed my eyes and listened to the wind, to the waves, to the quiet breath of a life finally redeemed.